Hello, my name is Daryl Robert Schoon, and on my last show I talked about the differences and similarities between the financial crises that is happening today and the Great Depression. And at the end of the show I said on my next show I was going to talk about why I was optimistic, why I feel better about what is in front of us than I have ever in my life. And this is in knowledge that the crisis has not yet run its course. This is with full knowledge that what we are about to experience is going to be worse than even the Great Depression. Because what happened in the Great Depression was a collapse of the credit and debt balance that capitalism needs to keep going. That is happening today, but it's going to be exacerbated with a currency collapse, with a collapse of money itself. In the 1930s, when you had the Great Depression, money was still backed by gold. So there was a stability to it. All right? People didn't have any money. It was tough. The game had stopped going. The movement between credit and debt had slowed to such a degree that basically it was just struggling on the hand-to-mouth thing. The good times had not returned. Now, today we're in the same position, except it's now going to get a lot worse because we have the same dynamic going on, defaulting debt, a collapse of demand, but now we have the collapse of currencies as well. Because since 1971, all currencies in the world have been fiat, which means they're just merely pieces of paper. They're merely paper coupons that we trade each other based upon the confidence that that piece of paper has value. And the moment, the day is coming closer and closer, and we are almost there when all of a sudden that piece of paper is going to become valueless. All right? Now, why I'm going to tell you is why I'm positive is because this is happening in a much larger context. The collapse of the present economy, the collapse of the present era, the collapse of the world as we know it is merely the beginning of a new age. We are seeing the passing of an old age. We're seeing the passing of an era. A new era is going to take its place that is eventually going to be far different as this passing era as can even be imagined. Now, I'm going to show you a book here. It's called The Great Wave. All right? The Great Wave was written by Professor David Hackett Fischer in 1996. Fischer is an economic historian. And he went and they've gone back and they've done studies of economies, the prices and everything. And he said he noticed as an economic historian that history goes through waves. All right? We have periods of economic stability, price stability. And those periods of price stability are interrupted. They're always interrupted every 80 to every 100 years, 200 years, so somewhere in between there. It's not distinct. But periods of stability are always interrupted by what he calls waves of rising prices. Somewhere, all of a sudden, prices start rising. He says, and there's no real reason in the beginning. All right? All you notice is, all of a sudden, prices start rising. And in every era of stability, this has always been the case. And as an example, he takes the medieval period. And he shows that for a period of 100 to 200 years, prices were stable. All right? Prices were stable. And then he said what happened is, suddenly, prices started rising. And this was what he calls price revolutions. He said every period of stability throughout history is interrupted by what he calls a price revolution. Now, he said throughout the ages, people have noticed this, and they've taken in their little pit paradigm and try and explain why prices rise. Okay? Demographic people bring their tools to the table and say, oh, you had population increase or decrease or something happened. You had astrologers trying to correlate it with astrological signs. You had monetary authorities trying to attach these rising prices to monetary changes. He says it didn't work. All we know is periods of stability are interrupted throughout time by rising prices. Now, he says these price revolutions, these waves of rising prices last for anywhere from 80 to 160 years. And those price revolutions, at the end of it, they end up in complete economic collapse. Whatever the era was before, these waves of rising prices all of a sudden come up, and at the end of 80 to 160 years later, or sometime in between, it reaches such a crescendo, it ends in complete economic collapse and the destruction of the stability that had gone on before. All right? The era, it wipes out the previous era. Now, he said, for example, this is what happened with the medieval period. At a certain time, prices started rising, and the stability of the medieval period was completely wiped out. And he said this price revolution that interrupted the medieval times was accompanied, as they very often are, by disasters of totally different types. Not just you have economic disaster during the price revolution that happened, that ended the medieval ages, that ended the Middle Ages, you had the Black Plague. So you had the Black Plague combined with rising prices that just wiped out the medieval period. Now, out of the ashes of the medieval period, laid low by massive inflation and by the decimation of Western Europe by the Black Plague, out of the ashes of that society came the Renaissance. Extraordinary. Arts, growth, beauty, trade. It was wonderful for the next 100 or so years. And then all of a sudden, prices started rising again. All right? Prices started rising. You had another price revolution, as Hackett Fischer said. And at the end of that price revolution, complete economic collapse, complete cultural devastation. Everything was zeroed back to less than zero, as a matter of fact. And out of that came the Enlightenment. Came the flowering of intellectual thought. Came the freedom of thinking, away from the church, away from the dogma of the ideologies that constrained human before. Ideas like human freedom took root. And all of a sudden, prices started rising again, economic collapse, 100 Years' War, decimation of previous cultures, and out of that you had what Fischer calls the period of Victorian equilibrium. All right? I call this period not Victorian equilibrium. I call it the era of modern banking. I call it the era of easy credit. But what this happened, concomitant with England's rise in the world, you had a period of vast achievement that lasted for, again, well over 100 years to 200 years. Now, Professor David Hackett Fischer noted that this period of stability started changing in 1896. In 1896, prices started rising again. All right? Now, this rise in prices, this latest price revolution, was accompanied in the beginning by 2 world wars, massive world wars, atomic bombs, and a depression that laid the whole planet low. What we did, we got a respite. The credit machine built up again, but now we are on the verge of an even bigger collapse. And this is where we are today. Now, what I want to say is this. This has happened throughout history, and after every collapse has come another era. Another better era than the one previous to it. Now, David Hackett Fischer said, the amplitude of change in this price revolution is greater than any previous price revolution. We are in, he calls, the sea change of change. We are about to crest. We're about to collapse into a bigger collapse than we've ever had before. But I want to tell you, out of this ashes, out of this collapse is going to emerge something far different than we have ever seen in human history. For that, I want to go to another book. This is the book, The Critical Path, written by Buckminster Fuller, known to many as Bucky Fuller. What they didn't know about Buckminster Fuller, he was known as a futurist. I mean, at one point, Time magazine said he had made 50 predictions, 48 of them had come true, which is an astounding number. Now, what people don't know about Bucky is that Bucky was not just intellectually brilliant. Bucky was a mystic. Bucky had foreknowledge. these predictions of his didn't just come out of thin air. He had access to a knowledge base that most people don't have. That's why there had the high degree of accuracy that he had. Now, when Bucky died in 1981, he was in his late 80s at the time, he wrote this book, Critical Path. Critical Path was his message to us about Spaceship Earth and about what was to happen to us. The foreword to the Critical Path is entitled, let me read it. In 2011, I think it is particularly pertinent. This is 30 years after Bucky wrote this book. The introduction is titled, Twilight of the World's Power Structures. And this is what Bucky told us. Humanity is moving ever deeper into crises, a crisis without precedent. First, it is a crisis brought about by cosmic evolution, irrevocably intent upon completely transforming a omni-disintegrated humanity from a complex of around the world, remotely deployed from one another, differently colored, differently credoed, differently cultured, differently communicating, and differently competing entities into a completely integrated, comprehensively interconsiderate, harmonious whole. That is Bucky speak for a cosmic transformation of a world of differences based on color, creed, communication, and beliefs into a world that is harmonious, interdependent, and at peace. That's what Bucky just said. He also said, second, we are in an unprecedented crisis because cosmic evolution is also irrevocably intent upon making omni-integrated humanity omni-successful, able to live sustainably at an unprecedentedly high standard of living for all Earthians than has ever been experienced by any. So Bucky said, we are going to enter a period of crises that we've never experienced before. And now Bucky was brilliant. He knew that we had had black plagues. He knew we had natural disasters. He knew that we had 2 world wars in the last century that he was alive through, and an economic collapse. And he still used the words unprecedented crises. We are heading into a period of crises that we have never before seen. This is not just going to be an economic collapse. This is going to be on levels that we can't even imagine. But what Bucky said out of this, like David Hackett Fischer said before him from an academic point of view, we are going to enter a better world. Now, Bucky said this is a cosmically intended event. Now, David Hackett Fischer won't go as far as to say that. He just says we're going to have an event. And this event is going to result in a better world. Bucky said this is a cosmically intended event that is going to result in a metaphysically better world. This is going to result in a world that we've moved away from competition to cooperation. This is a world where we're going to move away from fear into love. One of my statements has always been, until humanity changes, history will not. And what I want to tell you, that humanity is about to change, and so is history. My own thinking about money and economics really started in 1992. In fact, it wasn't my thinking. This is my book that I put on the web in 2007, 2008, and it's called How to Survive the Crisis and Prosper in the Process, with the Time of the Vulture investment module, an analysis of the economic crises facing the U.S. and the world. This is a book of a paper I presented at the Positive Deviant Network in March 2007, where I predicted that real estate was going to fall 40 to 70%, the stock market was going to fall 70 to 90%, and that we were headed into a crisis that was going to be worse than the Great Depression. Now, when I wrote the book, I used 3 paragraphs that had come to me in 1992. And I want to share them with you now. In 1992, that's 19 years ago, these following words came to me, and I wrote them down. In times of expansion, it is to the hare the prizes go. Quick, risk-taking, and bold, his qualities are exactly suited to the times. In periods of contraction, the tortoise is favored. Slow and conservative, quick only to retract his vulnerable head and neck, his is the wisest bet, when the slow and sure is preferable to the quick and easy. Every so often, however, there comes a time when neither the hare nor the tortoise is the victor. This is when both the bear and the bull have been vanquished, when the pastures upon which the bull once grazed are long gone, and the bear's lair itself lies buried deep beneath the rubble of economic collapse. This is the time of the vulture. For the vulture feeds neither upon the pastures of the bull nor the stored up wealth of the bear. The vulture feeds instead upon the blind ignorance and denial of the ostrich. The time of the vulture is at hand. Those words came to me in 1992. I can assure you they weren't my words. When I wrote them down, I looked at those words with as much wonderment as I had for years later. They didn't make any sense. We weren't on the verge of economic collapse at the time, but those words spoke about it. Those words talked about the time of the vulture. But when I presented my paper to the Positive and Deviant Network in 2007, and I wrote this book, I knew that those words were about to come true. And 4 years later, we're 4 years closer to the time of the vulture. Those words came to me from the same well of knowledge that Bucky drew his well of knowledge. I'm not saying I am as in touch with that well of knowledge as was Bucky. I'm not saying that at all. But I'm saying that they did come from that same well of knowledge. I want to share with you 2 other pieces of paper that talked about the collapse. All right? Now, in Tucson, for the last, between in the 70s up through the mid-2000s, there was a psychic here by the name of Reverend Robert Ireland. He had a church in Tucson. And what Reverend Ireland would do, once a week, he would go into a trance, drop out. And an entity named Dr. Carlos Blair, personality, would come in and speak to whoever was there for around a half an hour. 25 minutes, generally, that's what it was. And he would talk for around 15 minutes on many metaphysical subjects, and then he would take questions from the audience. We have transcriptions of those talks here in Tucson, and 2 of those talks, transcripts were given to me because it was known that I spoke about money and I spoke about economics. And I want to read to you from 2 of those transcripts. This was from a talk Dr. Carlos Blair gave in January 22nd, 1980. 1980. And this is called Earth Changes Predictions. All right? This is what he's saying. He said the area off of Florida is going to rise. A greater portion of Mexico is going to fall away. There are going to be areas of the world that will be affected as heavily. Japan will be no more. Most of you are familiar with Edgar Cayce, who was a psychic, and he made many changes about Earth predictions. And they have been very carefully selected the place, they have very carefully selected the place to build a foundation for their organization based on the knowledge of these Earth changes. And that was back in Virginia City. I mean, in North Carolina, in Virginia. It was, I forget the name of the city. All right. And this is what he said. There will be eruptions of volcanoes, many disturbances, and we in spirit see great portions of this being done not only through devastation by water, but also that of the fire. Man has created such storages of electricity that they will be shorted into the rising waters that will bring forth great fires, explosions, and electrocutions. All right. Now, when you find that they are going to build greater atomic plants, nuclear plants, gearing up for greater war efforts with more bombs, with greater devastation, not just upon man, but upon the very atmosphere, then it will behoove each of you to stand in opposition, doubly going forward of that concept of thought. So this is what Dr. Carlos Blair said in 1980. He predicted a lot of changes, earth changes. He referred to the Edgar Cayce predictions. And in 1992, Dr. Carlos Blair gave another talk about earth changes, and he referred to the previous talk in 1980. Now, he also talked about money, which brings me to this. All right. Most of you, this is 1992, most of you are aware of the chaos that is taking place in all of these countries that were under the rule of communism. When mankind approaches a time when there are new beginnings, changes such as these will bring forth some levels of chaos. In your country right now, as you see, there are signs of economic recovery. However, it has not reached its full stage, and there will be additional times of turmoil in the monetary sense concerning your country and the world as a whole. The monetary situation is not good, as most of you are aware. The country in which you live is the greatest you could be at this time, but even then it is a country that is bankrupt as such, even though it has not been legally pronounced. The debt of this country, the United States, is phenomenal. If it were a private individual, it would have been declared bankrupt long before now. There will be financial challenges throughout the world, not just in this place where you live in the years ahead. You are in the best place you could possibly be, but it is a time when man will find himself once again turning his thoughts away from that of the monetary, material, and turning his thoughts to his fellow man and to the spiritual and to his relationship with God. It is going to be a spiritual revolution. Oftentimes it does not come about until man finds himself in situations of being uncomfortable, and then and only then he has a tendency to turn his thoughts to God. This is what is going to happen. Carlos Blair predicted in the 1980 and 1992 severe earth changes. And he still holds to that in these transcriptions. And that's what I want to say. These psychic transcriptions, these psychic predictions, correlate exactly with what Bucky Fuller predicted, and in another way, what the academician David Hackett Fischer predicted in 1996. We are entering a period of chaos, economic collapse, and monetary devastation. But out of that collapse, out of that devastation, which is now underway, we are going to emerge a far better people, a far better world, a world that we cannot even now imagine. I end all of my articles with the words, buy gold, buy silver, have faith. I presented my paper predicting an economic collapse in March of 2007. At that time, gold was approximately $675. Silver was well below 10. Silver is now above 30. Gold is once again in the 1600s. It reached 1900 a month and a half ago. My words still stand. Buy silver, buy gold, have faith. And the greatest of these is faith, because you can't buy it. But it's the most important. And as we move into a tomorrow that is only now arriving, that faith is the thing that's going to get you through. Daryl Robert Schoon, I wish you the best, but that's why I face these times, as consequential as they are, with the faith and equanimity that I have.